riveting testimony from all of you. Clearly, as we listen to the science, the data that you've presented, it raises even more questions. We're going to go into the first round of questions, and there is a vote going on the House floor, so you'll see members getting up, going, and coming back. But we're going to continue this because I think it's real important that we get as many questions answered as possible. Again, there are people who were invited who didn't come today, and kind of underscores the point that if there were subpoena powers, then we could have compelled more scientists to come. Why they didn't want to come is a mystery. All we're trying to do is get facts. If they have nothing to hide, they should be here, because this is a question everybody wants to know the answer to. People all across the country are not satisfied that, okay, we have a vaccine, but now as we're starting to get our economy opened again, shouldn't we find out how this happened? Shouldn't we get to the bottom of this to prevent it from happening again at the minimum? But if it was a lab leak, that raises serious questions. And so all of you have talked about not only the hypothesis of a lab leak, but in fact the near certainty that this was a lab leak. And so let's get into some of those facts. And the biggest facts that I've seen are, number one, with over 80,000 animals tested, maybe the largest testing that's been done for a virus like this. Not a single animal has been found. You've talked about what gain of function research can do to ultimately expedite and make this a virus that's much more invasive to cause damage to people, to be spread at a level where it looks like it has been around a lot longer, maybe over a decade. And so I guess if I could start with you, Dr. Girard, when you look at all of this evidence, do we know if there are any scientists in America who were in communication with any of the scientists at the Wuhan lab who may be able to shed a little more light of what happened and how could this kind of leak occur?
So thank you for the question. I personally was not in communication with anyone there. I think it's very likely that Dr. Fauci was, because they were NIAID recipients directly or indirectly, but that's the reason why you need to ask him that question. I do not know that. I think it's probably likely that Bob Redfield, who had extensive ties and I know was on the phone 24/7 for weeks trying to get information from China and the WHO, might have had those, but I don't know that for certain, and I certainly didn't have communication with them.
And how could a leak like this occur? We've seen with SARS, there have been other problems with labs and maybe the safety of this Wuhan lab.
Well, I think it's been pointed out that lab leaks are not uncommon. The last, I believe, 6 deaths from SARS were all from lab leaks. There was a lab leak of smallpox. It's widely assessed that the 1978 pandemic of influenza was probably due to a lab leak. So lab leaks occur even under the best of circumstances because these viruses are adapted to be highly infectious, so that only a few viral particles could cause an infection. And particularly with this virus, with so much asymptomatic spread, a person could have spread it to dozens or hundreds or thousands of people before any symptom actually arose. And we do have troubling reports that were from the State Department and other agencies of potential work being done at a much lower level of biosafety than should have been done at this level. So lab leaks are not uncommon at all. These are incredibly dangerous microbes that are highly infectious and evolved to be that way. So the fact that there would be a lab leak, particularly where there has been issues of biosafety, does not surprise me and would not surprise any honest scientist in this country.
Dr. Asher, you had given a few specific recommendations. One of those was stop funding the CCP research into biological weapons, biologics in general, because of this, unfortunately, this obfuscation. I mean, we've seen the Communist Chinese Party covering up information, maybe destroying evidence, corrupting the World Health Organization. How long has this been a concern? And clearly this is something we need to address sooner rather than later, but if you can talk more about
briefly, I've been worried about this. I was a senior advisor for East Asian Pacific Affairs under the Bush administration at State, and then went on to run our programs against North Korea and the AQCON network, really financially and some of our other things. And, but on China, it's been as an Asia hand for since 34 years of my life, I've been shocked at the sort of lack of cognizance in our scientific community, and I am deeply involved with our scientific community as a venture capitalist, separate from the Hudson Institute, mostly in biotech. We're just not really thinking about the dual-use nature of synthetic biology. Which is ironic, since in 2018 the National Academy of Sciences put out a strong study warning about biotech dual-use capabilities fueling biological warfare-related capabilities in adversarial nations, and including in our own nation. They could get out of one of our labs. So, we're at a stage here, which the scientists can talk about better than me, where you can do things with biology that can create essentially a weapon as a gain-of-function experiment. And if it gets out of a lab and you don't stop it, like happened in China, it becomes a weapon. So this is to me a huge issue for you, sir, and all of the members of Congress.
And I'll ask this to each of you as my final question, because there has been a lot of debate about gain-of-function research, and clearly it has been conducted over time. Just how directly or indirectly taxpayer funding was involved in the Wuhan labs gain-of-function research is something that we should be investigating more. But in general, weighing the pros and cons, especially in relation to these kind of viruses, do any one of you want to discuss or talk about what we should be looking at in terms of policy regarding gain-of-function research? Dr. Quaid, start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I'd like to get something done, the good is better than the impossible that you can't get done. I would strongly recommend that gain-of-function research be placed under the infrastructure of the Institutional Review Board, so that any federal funding of gain-of-function research the pros and cons of that research has to be presented to an independent, a party of lay people from the community where the laboratory is, and they get to decide if this sounds too dangerous. I think one of the things we saw here was that the gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology was set up to be reviewed inside the NIH, and it was never sent to them to look at. So we've proven that the current structure fails, but as someone who's invented 7 drugs and worked with IRBs, 30 different clinical trials, they're very good at balancing risk to the humans and safety. I can't do one study in clinical trials without an IRB, and we have 200 million people infected here with no oversight.
And Dr. Giroir.
I certainly
Dr. Muller.
support local review, but the national level federal review has to be overhauled. Number one, how do we know that any gain-of-function research or something that could be interpreted actually gets into the P3 NIH process? And we saw from the emails that there were no coronavirus work that actually got into the process, so there's an intake issue. Number two, there's a transparency issue. Who is reviewing it? What are their conflicts of interest? What are the criteria that they have that allow or disallow? And again, I do agree that this can't just be scientists who work in infectious diseases. They are not experts in national security. They're not experts in ethical considerations. It has to be transparent. It has to be multidisciplinary, and somebody needs to be accountable. That means either the head of that institute or the head of the NIH needs to sign on the dotted line, and it must be transparent to Congress. I would say that in addition to the local review, which would be a second level.
Dr. Muller, I think.
Yeah, I'm not that concerned about gain-of-function research in the United States. I think that some legislation could take care of that. The issue is, what do we do about China? What do we do about terrorist groups? What we need here is a strengthening of the Biological Warfare Convention, something that demands that we have access to these laboratories and see what's going on. We could cut out all gain-of-function research in the United States. It would do no good if the Wuhan Institute of Virology just closes its doors, doesn't let anybody see what it's doing, and continues on. So we need to have sanctions that will demand that China and other countries be open and accessible, and their data be transparent.
Very important recommendations. Thank you. Now, Mr. Comer.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scalise. Dr. Asher, a story came out last week